Okay, Chairman, we're now live on YouTube, and Councillor Ellis is just joining the meeting, so we have a full complement.
Thank you. I guess I'll start. So, welcome to this virtual meeting of the Eastern Committee. My name is Councillor Richard Cole, and I'm the chairman of this committee. And this evening I'm supported by a number of officers: Beth Howland-Smith, who's development manager; Catherine Pearson, she's here yet, but area team leader; Kate Edwards, principal planning officer; Tracy Farthing, planning officer; Lewis Jones, planning lawyer; and Kimberly Sohn, who is the clerk for this meeting. So members and officers, please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate that you wish to speak. Please keep yourself on mute when you are not speaking. Can I also ask any questions are kept brief and to the point? We will be timing speeches this evening, and an alarm will sound when you have been speaking for 4 minutes. Can I ask, is any member online who doesn't have the hand function? I know there have been in the past some members who do not have the hand function. Okay, fine. So if any member of the committee loses their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them to rejoin the meeting. And you know the procedure of if you can't get it to work, then call in by phone. And if the webcast stream fails, then we'll have to adjourn until we're able to reset the connection, since we must be visible online. So we'll move on to item 1. Kimberly, are there any apologies from members for this meeting?
We have apologies from Councillor Richard Seaborn today, and Councillor Val Henry is here as substitute. Thank you.
So minutes of the last meeting. Committee, can you agree the minutes of the last meeting held on the 29th of July? That sounds correct.
Agreed.
29th of July.
Agreed.
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 Kimberly, have there been any declarations of interest received before the meeting?
None received, Chairman.
Are there any other further interests? Any member wishes to declare now? Okay. Have there been any questions from members of the public, Kimberly?
None received, Chairman.
And members, so questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Okay. Right. Updates to legislation since the last meeting. I think there has been some announcements, I believe. And Beth is going to give a statement, which she says will be quite long. But please, it's not a question and answer session, so because I'm sure we'll have lots of meetings about it in future. So just please listen to what Beth says, and then we can move on to the business of this evening. Beth.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. You may well be aware from the media that there are 2 new planning consultations from the government, and as Councillor Cole has said, as the Chairman said, we as officers have not had yet the chance to grapple with everything that is contained within them. So I would ask that you just please treat this as an update.
Beth, sorry to interrupt. I've just had a message from Fiona to say she's lost her connection, so we're not streaming at the second. Oh, no, she's back on. We're all right.
Okay. Okay to continue?
Yes, please carry on,
Yeah.
Beth.
Okay, so firstly, there's been a white paper entitled Planning for the Future that's been published, which basically sets out the government's plans to fundamentally reform the planning system. And that includes plans to designate land into 3 categories, which are growth areas, renewal areas, and protected areas, with the degree of development permitted being commensurate with that particular level of protection. And very, very simply, it's proposed to make planning a clearer rules-based system. Now, within this reform, it also means that much needed homes will be built a lot quicker. Every area is to have a local plan in place. That the planning system will be made much more accessible by harnessing the latest technology through online maps and data. Valued green spaces will be protected for future generations by allowing for more building on brownfield land and all new streets to be tree lined. There will be a simpler national levy to replace the current system of community infrastructure levies and planning obligations, which are believed to cause a fair amount of delay in bringing forward development. There'll be the creation of a fast track system for beautiful homes, and the wider introduction of design, local design guidance and design codes, with the view to have all new homes ready to be zero carbon, with no new homes delivered under the new system needed to be retrofitted, as the government seeks to contribute to the commitment to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This consultation closes on the 29th of October, and officers will be assisting members in drafting a corporate response to this consultation. This consultation also does set out that it is a longer term reform that they are considering, and that there are shorter term measures that will be required in order to improve the current planning system. So the second consultation covers 4 main areas, and that's from a policy perspective, changes to the standard methodology for assessing local housing need, the securing of first homes, the temporary lifting of the small sites threshold below which developers do not need to contribute to affordable housing, and that's envisaged to be for proposals for up to 40 or 50 units, and that's being proposed in order to assist the small to medium construction companies in recovering from the economic impacts of the COVID crisis. And then finally, there'll be an extension to the current permission in principle procedure to incorporate major developments into that as well, so that there is a fast track to securing the principle of development without having to submit so much detail up front. The consultation period for this second white paper is 1st of October this year, and again, officers will be assisting members with their corporate response to this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. In terms of the response to these documents, that's not a duty of the planning committees. I mean, that'll be done at a higher level, presumably, and we'll go through normal channels go through the executive. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman.
Yeah. Okay. Presumably there's nothing from what you said that we have to take allowance of tonight in our deliberations. This is all, it's all for the future.
This is all for the future and under consultation, Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Okay, thank you. Okay, I should have said that, as you know, the polling feature within Zoom has been set up, so votes on these items we're going to go through can be taken by general assent or using the polling. And if a recorded vote is required, this will be done as normal by the roll call. So we'll move on to the first of the 2 applications tonight. The first one is Land at Caesar's Place, Ogford Road, Godalming. Tracy, are you going to give us a briefing on that, please?
Yeah, one moment. Let me share my screen with you. Are you seeing that now?
No, Tracy.
Okay.
Do you want me to put it up?
One moment.
While you're doing that, the Vice Chairman has pointed out that I didn't ask Beth to report on applications decided under the new temporary delegation to the Head of Planning and Economic Development. So Beth, are you able to say, to report on that?
Thank you, Chairman. I am not aware of any. However, if there's anything that I have missed, I will report it at the next meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I can certainly see the screen now, see the presentation.
Super. Thank you, Chairman. Members will be aware of the constraints posed by the A4 report in relation to the plans and the resolution quality. It's noted that earlier this month, the larger format plans were prepared and sent as an update. The images have also been enhanced within this presentation to achieve the best possible images. The application is for the installation of a 5.5 metre high telecommunications pole, 4 dishes and 4 equipment cabinets upon the roof of Caesars Place. Caesars Place is a development of retirement apartments on the northern side of Oxford Road in Godalming. There is at present a small amount of rooftop equipment on the area of the roof to the northeastern, that part there, the northeastern roof. The proposal would see a 5.5 metre telecommunications pole at that most northeasterly point, with proposed 4 dishes mounted on a frame, and to the southeast of that 4 equipment cabinets. The site photos depict the building from Oxford Road and from the car park to the side of Caesars Place. The proposal is not highly visible from the main road. The bottom image denotes the areas where the mast would be situated, outlined in red, and the equipment cabinets in blue. These images show longer views from outside of the site. These images are taken from the rooftop, and they indicate the separation distance to the windows facing towards the proposed rooftop site. These are photos taken from the apartment opposite the site. The key matters for consideration are the impact on the conservation area and the visual amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Higgin, you have your hand up. Is it something relevant to this point, or can we leave it until the discussion?
I'd just been going to ask about the delegated authority decisions, but you had already dealt with that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have one speaker tonight, Mr. Arthur Hayes, who is going to object to the application. So, Mr. Hayes, you have 4 minutes to make your points. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Right. First, thanks to all for visiting Caesars Place last week. We hope the visit was informative and will be helpful when considering the Walden Telecoms planning application. In my letter listing objections of 31st of December last year, I noted that an important elevation was missing from the application documents. This elevation should have shown the proposed position of cabinets located above apartment 31 in relation to the pole and the aerial. This is the view you may have seen for the first time from the terrace during the visit. There is still no record of it in the application. This, in fact, is what your recent photographs have shown. It would seem that this application ignores the guidance of the Code of Best Practice 2016. The application should be clear, accurate, and complete. I also stated in my letter that I considered the Walden application was premature, with many matters unresolved or out of sequence, and that is still my view. We assumed that Walden's prepared a feasibility study before embarking on this proposal, and that the study probably forms the bulk of the documentation of that application. It suggests the study was strong on telecoms technology, but weak on buildings, how they work and people. It is the latter items that make up the bulk of our so-called problems. All these matters need to be discussed by the landlord and the operator contractor, and agreements reached before applying for full planning approval. To date, we're not aware of any such discussions taking place between the parties concerned. There are obviously solutions to some of the problems we have identified in the current proposal that would improve its appearance. It's difficult to understand why Walden Telecoms haven't identified and incorporated them themselves in the current proposal. These modifications and changes are, in our view, relatively simple, but others, the roof structure, for example, may be difficult, impractical, or impossible. Surely such matters should be examined in detail before seeking final permission. We note that the planning officer's recommendation remains unchanged as permission to be granted subject to conditions. We consider this to be the wrong decision. It means that the proposal, exactly as now submitted, is approved and can go ahead immediately. Changes required by the occupiers would have to be submitted as separate planning applications by Walden Telecoms. There's no incentive for the applicant to make any further submissions, and if so minded, he can ignore our comments and proceed unheeded. Outline permission with reserved matters means a final detailed proposal, as modified and agreed by all parties, must be submitted for full permission within 3 years of the date of the outline permission. Meanwhile, parallel negotiations between the landlord and telecoms contractor would continue and be completed as required by the code. This is our preferred decision, but the right decision is dismissal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Okay, so we move on to discussion, debate. So, Councillor Follows.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will just start by thanking officers for facilitating a site visit. I know that was something that myself and Anne-Marie, as the other ward councillor, were very keen on doing. I know many residents wanted us to do so too, so that we could have this discussion in good faith and with appropriate knowledge of what we were actually talking about. And the main reason we called it in the first place is because there was such a great deal of local concern, particularly from the residents that lived within the building in question. And I do think actually going to the site provided some value for us in being able to see the sort of scale of what we're talking about, but also how impacted the visual amenity is. Tracy summed up in the report, there are sort of two matters really that we have to think about and balance. And as far as I see, they're both matters of judgment. So the community benefit derived from having the mast at all, and the impact upon residents of the construction and ongoing maintenance, and of course how that might impact the wider Godalming area. So looking at the actual benefits, I mean, I honestly do get the benefits of having such a mast. I mean, we don't want to be left behind in terms of technology and communications infrastructure particularly, and also because we've had quite a lot of masts go through or coming through, which have been objected to. I mean, if we object to every single one of these masts, Godalming will continue to suffer from poor signal and other issues over time. And really, I do think we have to factor that in. I know some of the objections talked about health grounds and health risks. I know that's not really our remit. I mean, I've done quite a lot of reading on this, as I know many of the other committee members have. I'm quite comfortable with the overall concept of these masts anyway, and I'm not going to go into that any further. So really, we're just looking at balancing that benefit with the impact upon residents, and that's what the site visit really made clear. I obviously sent around the photos I took earlier when I was on the site visit, and I did go up to the top floor as well. And from those photos, you can see it would certainly be visible from the courtyard. We could see the smaller aerial as it is now. Obviously, it's going to include quite a lot more equipment, and we'd see that from the ground quite clearly. The site's only got minimal access, particularly maintenance access. There's a single window door aperture that allows access to the roof. There's no lift that the engineers could use. The access to the building is not permanent, it's controlled because of the nature of what the building is. I went up at the request of one of the residents with officers to one of the second floor apartments that basically faces where this would be, and it would be very prominent from every single window in that apartment and every window that goes along there. And actually the scale would also be visible from the wider Oxford conservation area, although as we tried, not from the town centre conservation area, we did go down there, a good few number of members. So obviously I'm going to listen to the rest of the debate, but at present I'm of the view that the general benefit to the community doesn't outweigh the specific harm to residents. And I would struggle to see how we would protect residents from that harm through conditions. And so ideally, I would love to explore with the applicant where else we could build such a piece of equipment, because I do think it is necessary for the town that we start doing this. But as I can't reconcile that benefit to the harm, I'll be voting against this unless there's very good reasons otherwise presented by other members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask a question of Tracy? Mr. Hayes raised some points about the level of development of the proposal and the engineering works that might be required before we should consider planning permission. Can you comment on whether you believe that's the case, that all the engineering work is a matter for this committee?
I do not consider that that's a planning consideration. I think that everything has been addressed within the report. I have addressed issues that have arose from the representations and the objections that I have received, and I've addressed everyone which I believe to be as of planning merit.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One was on page 6. It says that there's a 5.5 metre telecommunications pole. And then in the next paragraph, it says that the pole would be approximately 7.2 metres from the roof level. So I'm slightly confused as to why there's two different measurements. So that's one question. The second question is, it's proposed to paint the pole white and the cabinets and steelwork in a brick effect. It'd be interesting to see a photograph of what such a thing looks like, a brick effect painted cabinet. And also, I'm curious as to what is that necessarily the best way of camouflaging something? If we paint the pole white, why are we painting that a brick effect if you want to hide it? So just a couple of questions, really. Thank you.
Tracy, can you answer those points?
Hello, Chairman. I believe that the measurement of the 5.5 metre pole is on a base. However, I will double check that, and also that the measurement was taken from the roof and there is a parapet. So it would be 5.5 metres from the top of the parapet. However, I think that including the base, it is 7.2 metres from the rooftop measurement.
And the point about painting the mast white but not the cabinets, I mean, camouflage is of course a very complex issue, but is painting those two units that way, is that a standard procedure?
It is a standard procedure for equipment and infrastructure to be camouflaged as best as possible. In this instance, the applicants have considered that the cabinet equipment, or the cabinet cases, would be more appropriate, disguised as brick. As well, I can only speculate that they would sort of continue the line of brickwork up because they're placed closer to the elevation. This is only speculation. We can only, just what I think, I can only assess the application that's before me and assess the visual aesthetics of what has been proposed.
Okay. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just got a couple of questions. I've obviously looked through the application, and you know, on the balance, it's to do with the sort of the community benefit of this. And as Councillor Follows mentioned earlier, done some reading around 5G, and I understand that it works on a, on a close network of a lot of 5G of these towers, these masts. What I can't understand is that where the other network is, it would be, this needs to be part of a whole kind of broader connectivity plan, surely. With one mast in Godalming for 5G, I understand, Councillor Follows mentioned there were other applications, but surely this needs to be part of a broader plan. And putting one here on its own, and obviously it is intrusive. There's no getting away from it. When you look at it, it is intrusive on the landscape there. But obviously, if we're weighing up the benefits, then that has to rely on connection for people. And where is the nearest other mast? What is the actual connectivity, or is this one needed to be so tall and high because there are very few other masts around? So have we got any idea of a bigger plan for this? Thank you.
Well, yeah, the 5G cells are much smaller than the 4G cells, so there are a lot more antenna. But do we have any knowledge? I'm not sure it's applicable to this application, but do we have examples of other 5G masts that are being built around or applied for around Godalming? Tracy, I mean, there's no reason why you should know,
No, I off the top of my head, I don't know the location of other sites around Godalming.
Chairman, just to add to that, I'm not aware of any applications that are currently going through the process for the entire borough, actually, which relate to 5G at all. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's two in Cranley I know of, but which have been applied for, but or close to Cranley. Well, Councillor Townsend, we could seek something from the supplier, but I'm not sure. In the end, this is what they're applying for now. I mean, and they may apply for more in the future. I'm not sure how it's material to this particular application.
I was just, thank you, Chairman. I was just sort of trying to work out what the benefit would actually be. Because of the conservation area and the visual impact. I was weighing that up amongst against the benefit. That was the point of my question. Thank you anyway.
Now, you did say at the start talk about site selection. Now I understand that the other sites were looked at for this mast. Is there any evidence of that, Tracy, in the application or in the paperwork that you've seen?
Yes, Chairman, I sent out an email to all of those who attended the site visit, and I explained that the applicant had in fact submitted some information about other sites.
Okay, and this was their selection from that set of sites.
Yes.
Okay. Was there any consultation on that? I mean, did the council have any input to that particular selection?
I don't know if I'm not sure of that, Chairman.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Councillor Costa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If I can just a number of things to say, but if I can just comment on the last couple of points. So, yes, we did get that because I asked for it at the site visit because I said I was used to seeing these assessments of alternative sites as part of applications, because I've had to deal with a number of prior notice applications for masts in my own ward in the past year. So I'm getting quite used to these things. I did see it and it seemed credible to me, but they clearly had done search, and I think that's fine. I was a little bit concerned about the issues that were being raised by Councillor Townsend. It does seem to me that we risk going down a path that really isn't appropriate when we consider what our responsibility is here, which is to look at the application in front of us and to judge that general benefit against the visual amenity. And, trying to second guess what the plans of a provider might be for putting masts somewhere else in and not knowing about them and finding that is some way to object just seems to me to be something we ought to be highly cautious of. The general point that I wanted to make, though, if I can, Chairman, is this. I was very grateful for the opportunity to have the site visit, because I hadn't really been able to get a feel for this until we actually went round there and had a look, both in the courtyard and by walking round on the outside and so on. I share the general analysis of Councillor Follows, that we actually have to judge the community benefit of improved signalage and all of that against the visual amenity in this case. Now, certainly in some of those I've seen recently, there was no issue really about them. The visual amenity was appalling. It would have ruined hills, some of the wooded hillside views in the community, which are embedded into our planning policy, as well as providing quite significant problems for residents within the vicinity of those proposals. Now, in this case, I don't believe that to be true. Having looked around the site, it did seem to me that apart from the people who are actually living on the development, and absolutely we must take full account of their issues, there is not going to be much significant impact from this particular mast. I wasn't able to go up. There seemed to be a restricted opportunity to do that and actually look at where the residents said. I saw the photos very briefly, and I understand that yeah, that does provide some difficulty in terms of visual amenity. But taken in the round, if you weigh the benefit against the general impacts visually, I think the officers have actually got it right, and I think this is an application we should actually agree.
Thank you, Councillor Costa. Councillor Hegan.
Thank you, Chairman. I had 2 points I wanted to raise. The first really follows on from Councillor Townsend's comments, because I can't get my head around how approving this one mast in isolation can deliver the social benefit that comes with 5G if we're not certain that other masts will go ahead, and that the question of 5G connectivity for Godalming should be looked at in the round, so that I'm really not sure that one mast can deliver that, and I'd appreciate some clarification on that. The other point I wanted to raise was in relation to the engineering concerns that Mr. Hayes raised. Is there an equivalent of building regulations that would look at the way in which the mast is erected and its safety and issues regarding maintenance that would be done separately, or could that all be conditioned? And again, I'd like some clarification on that.
Tracy, can you deal with the second point first? I think because the first point is a bit more complex. So the second point about the engineering control of this sort of issue.
I don't know whether there is an equivalent to building control in regards to the telecommunications. I would believe that there would be some sort of regulatory body that would deal with the installation, and to add to that, we wouldn't necessarily take that into account when we're looking at planning applications.
The first point, I think going back to whether it's a matter for this committee to try and understand the network design, I just don't think we have the expertise on this committee or within the officer corps to be able to critique the design of a network proposed by, even if we knew what it was, proposed by a particular supplier. I'm a bit reluctant to go down that route, and as someone said earlier that as Councillor Costa was that we aren't competent, so I'm not sure how we could offer any useful advice on that.
But if we're not able to be 100% certain that this mast in isolation is going to deliver any social benefit, surely there is one of the reasons to approve is removed.
Well, okay. Well, I think you've made the point. So, in terms of it's a matter for members to consider. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. If you have any problems with hearing me, there is a very large agricultural tractor cleaning the common or cutting the common outside. Do tell me if you can't hear me. First point I have is the impact on the residents, and I think there's two things there. it's very clear from the upper floor windows that that is going to have a significant visual impact. And visual impact is one thing, but the thing that does surprise me on this is they're installing this mast on top of a building which has a secure access point. There is no independent access to the top of this mast other than to go through the building, go through the floors, come out of a little window, climb up onto the place and come back again. Now, the mast has to be available 24/7. If something goes wrong with it, then they must be able to maintain it 24/7. And to me, there's a problem with their citing of this, is that they've got to find some way of basically accessing that building. And as the managers said, as well as Mr. Hayes, is the building is not manned except for certain periods during the week. It certainly is locked up and secure overnight. And I can't see any particular willingness on behalf of the residents to have somebody who's going to have access for the noise and for the potential security issue for this to be maintained at night. So that to me is a big issue about the impact on residents, not just the visual, but this question of maintenance. The second question we come up, and I hope I don't offend the chairman, but I am going to mention 4G and 5G. There's no evidence that this is part of the 5G strategy, so then I would find it very difficult to take that as a community benefit. If this was part of the 5G strategy for Godalming, and it would be very nice actually in Dunsfold if we could get a mast of any sort, including 4G, because we don't get any reception at the moment. But if it's a plan that you've got things going through there, then it's very difficult for us to actually take that into account in terms of the community benefit if we don't know. And if you took this back one and said, well, it's not 5G, it may improve 4G until 5G gets elected, then that of the same value? So I have great concerns on those 2 points as to whether they've come over the bar. And at the moment, I'm minded to reject this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I too have reservations. I didn't attend the planning site visit because I know Godalming very well. It is situated in a valley, and I understand there could be a need for masts. But I have concerns. One of the conditions in the report says that there won't be at the moment any permission for further masts. Well, in my experience of living in Guildford and locally here in Cranley, you know, it is giving permission for a mast is tantamount to giving permission for additions every so often. And so I think we should be aware of that. As to the comment that unfortunately, it won't have a big effect upon the heritage, it will have some effect. And I think that I don't think that as a committee, we can put any more restraints other than the conditions that are there already to prevent additions to the cabinets and to further additions to masts. So I understand Mr. Hayes' points, and I do sympathise, and I believe there is supposed to be no potential harm, and I understand that an investigation is going on at the moment to find out whether there is any potential harm from the radio waves, which we don't have that report at the moment. So those 2 points. I don't know how I'm going to be voting yet. I'll listen to everyone else. Thank you, Chair.
I think we can be careful here. There's a general overall permission or regulation which allows these companies to site these, at least propose to site these masts around the country. But we can't disagree. We can't reject them on principle. I think we have rather limited grounds for rejecting a particular site, and they've been discussed in the report in terms of the impact on visual immunity, etc., etc. We can't be against 5G. That'll just get overturned at appeal. So I think we're going to be careful about taking decisions on grounds where we haven't got the right to do that. Councillor Wilson.
I made some notes as I read and have listened, and if you bear with me, I'll read them out. I find it reprehensible that McCarthy and Stone, the owners of the building, are willing to put the residents' concerns a very poor second to the financial benefits of renting out roof space to a telecoms company. I feel the residents' pain, and if we should be unable to refuse this application on planning grounds, I can only apologise for planning law limiting our powers to do what a lot of us think is right. I would ask our planning experts if there is any way during this pandemic for telecom personnel to maintain social distancing, wear PPE at all times within the building, and ensure deep cleaning of any access area is done after each visit between construction and maintenance staff. I'd also like to quote from the initial advertising when the building was open with the 2-bedroom flat going for £500,000. Kevin Sims, Regional Sales and Marketing Director from McCarthy and Stone South East, said that these retirement living developments are carefully designed to provide the very best in independent living within a safe and secure environment, with the opportunity to benefit from companionship and also privacy when required. I think that very nearly is false advertising if you're going to sell bits of your roof and let Tom, Dick and Harry come in. So I have grave doubts about this, and I would wish for an answer to the question on protection during the COVID pandemic from our planning people, if I may. Thank you, Chairman.
Tracy, is that a question we can answer? I'm not sure. It's really a planning question, but is there anything you can say?
I don't think it's a question that I'm prepared to answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
I'm afraid, Councillor Wilson, it requires an expert answer. I'm afraid that's not an expertise we have available tonight. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. Like the rest of the committee, I'm no expert on masts and 5G, 4G, etc. But it seems to me that if it is necessary for a 5G network to have lots of sites, we've got to start somewhere. And we've got to look at this planning application on its merits and make a decision. Presumably, if we grant permission, and they can't find any other sites close enough to link to it, they won't put it up. It's got to, I suspect they're going to apply for various sites for masts, and when they've got sufficient sites close enough to each other, then they will develop, and therefore there will be benefit when that happens. The only other comment I would make is, again, you've got to deal with the application as it is and not with an application we prefer to see. But I'm sure everybody on the site, and I remember when it went up, if you look to the south, to the tree line, so you're getting near Oxford Ridge and so on, there's an almighty great tower up there with loads of dishes and everything else on it, which is on the skyline. And it would be so much better if this one was put in with the rest. But we have to deal with this application, and we can't refuse it because we prefer to have it somewhere else where there may be very good reasons from a technical point of view why it can't go there. But at the moment I'm minded to go with the officer's recommendation, but I'm listening to what everyone has to say. Thank you.
Councillor Goodridge, sorry, Councillor Follows, excuse me, Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I do just want to touch on the community benefit again. I mean, for me, the harm is evident. It's the level to which members think there is a degree of harm, I would argue. But I think if we're going back to community benefit, although we are not competent technically to evaluate the network provision, I do think we do have to explore it a little bit in order to actually to understand what benefit is being provided. Now, my understanding with 5G is that firstly, you do have to cluster them, and to actually address Councillor Goodridge's point, they're usually rolled out in a strategic plan, involves all those all the points within those clusters. Because effectively what you'd be doing here is creating one very small pocket of exceptional bandwidth within about 200 meters of the mast, whereas actually the community benefit to Godalming is actually wider coverage, and particularly on the 3 and 4G spectrum, which would actually be a genuine community benefit to Godalming. So for me, in the absence of an actual strategic plan for 5G, which I would expect to see as part of this, or at least some idea of it from the applicant, it's not providing the one community benefit that we would need, which is coverage. So whilst on the one hand, I've got harm I can see and can demonstrate and can evidence, I don't have benefit that I can tangibly put my finger on, which at the moment means I've got to vote not to vote for this application. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Follows. I think with all these things, it's a trade between the size of the cell and the bandwidth, the total bandwidth they're trying to handle. I mean, 5G's range is more than 200 meters. I think it's in very dense environments. They've been talking about that kind of cell size when everyone's driving huge bandwidth through the system. So how that applies here, I'm not sure. Again, we're going to be careful about trying to do.
May I ask a follow-up question to you and officers, Chair, based on that response?
Carry on, yes.
Can I just ask officers how they intend us to evaluate community benefit if we can't touch these issues with any competence? And actually, without being able to do that, and without there being information in the report that allows us to do that, how on earth do we evaluate benefit versus harm?
Well, I suspect that question is going to hang in the air. I mean, you've made the point as to whether the information is available. Clearly, we don't have the overall strategy for Godalming in front of us as we currently stand. So that's clear. Okay, Councillor Darcy, it's the second time I should have told Councillor Follows that he should be brief. Councillor Darcy, do you want to make me brief again?
Yeah. I'll be brief. I just wanted to agree with Councillor Follows in that it quite clearly says that the harm, which is accepted, there is some harm, should be weighed against public benefits. And the only public benefit put forward is the provision of the mobile coverage, 5G mobile coverage. Now, if we haven't established that in fact there will be that benefit to the wider community, then we can't take that into consideration. And as far as I'm concerned, that hasn't been established because they haven't provided enough information to establish it. And it's not our job to provide the information, it's their job. And if they haven't done it, then that's their problem, isn't it? So as far as I'm concerned, I can't vote for it. Thank you.
Okay, I've got no more hands up. So in that case, we can go to the vote. So the proposal, the motion is that subject to conditions 1 to 5 and informatives 1 to 2, permission be granted. I'm going to check before put up the was there any? There was no. Sorry, hang on a moment. There were no changes whether to any conditions in the papers. No, there were no changes. So that's the motion. Can you please vote?
My apologies. My vote box disappeared as you were talking. There we go. Thank you.
So I think Fiona was following what I said and to take it away again.
So the voting there is 6 votes in favour of the recommendation to grant and 9 votes against. So the recommendation to grant fails.
Can I have a motion from someone?
Mr. Chair, may I motion that we refuse this application based on intolerable harm to residential amenity?
Is there a seconder to that? So I can see Councillor Townsend hands with it.
Happy to second.
Okay, so we have to do a little bit more work than that, I'm afraid. Now, last time we tried to go into a breakout room, it didn't work. Has that been solved since, or are we going to try and do it in this forum?
We can try and do that, Chairman. It was Councillor Follows and sorry, I missed who was seconding that.
Councillor Townsend.
Councillor Townsend, okay, if you just bear with me a moment.
Just to remind people, the idea is that myself, the Vice Chairman, propose a seconder, and Lead Planning Officer will go away and come up with a proposed motion which might be carried.
So I've got Beth, Councillor Else, Councillor Townsend, Councillor Follows, Councillor Cole, and let me find Tracy. Just to let the members of the committee know, the chairman and vice chairman, Councillor Follows, Councillor Townsend, Beth Howland-Smith and Tracy Farthing are now in the breakout room.
Fiona, could you take Lewis into the breakout room, please?
Yeah, he should be joining shortly. Members of the committee, the other members and officers are just coming back now.
Okay, right. So the motion will be read out by Councillor Follows. Then there, of course, has the opportunity for debate on that motion before we take it to a vote. So Councillor Follows, can you propose the motion, please?
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I get this correct. The motion would be to oppose this based on the benefits of providing 5G mobile coverage to the public would not outweigh the adverse impacts in relation to the limited, less than substantial harm to the conservation area and impact on residential amenity by virtue of its oppressive form.
And Councillor Townsend, you're seconding that motion as read out.
Happy to second.
Okay. So are there any comments to that motion before we go to a vote? Councillor Hegan.
I didn't have any comments. Sorry if my hand's up. It was a
no problem. Councillor Coster.
Yeah.
You're on mute, Councillor Coster.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted. I must have missed the button. Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask whether, I don't quite know how these things work, I'm afraid. Can I just ask whether in coming up with that draft, which I guess was a bit of a slog as it took quite some time, officers were asked for or offered any advice as to the validity of the grounds on which we're going to refuse and the likelihood of us winning any appeal?
They certainly were involved in the wording, which is why it took, that's why the particular words were chosen. If you're asking that question, perhaps Beth, you can answer that point. This is about whether they, I think Councillor Costa is asking you to give a nod, so I think.
Thank you, Chairman. So if I understand Councillor Costa's question properly, it's whether or not we have given advice as to how robust those refusal reasons are. And what I would say is that they are matters for members to take a view on. They are areas for you to accept, that is absolutely acceptable for you to exercise your own judgments on. They're not technical areas, and the fact that you have decided to go against the officer recommendation is perfectly within your gift. They are defendable. I can't tell you whether or not we would win at appeal. I wish I could, but they are perfectly acceptable reasons for refusal based on members' judgment. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, as I understood the proposal that's put on the table, it doesn't reinforce the issue of intrusion for maintenance and the added disruption for residents. And you're talking about the size and scale. I thought that when we discussed it, there was also a concern about the appropriateness of the location in respect of the impact on residents. And I don't know whether that was considered and dismissed, but I just wanted to raise it. And I asked those people who drafted it whether they're happy that there wasn't anything else we could throw into the mix. Thank you.
That was discussed in some detail. Councillor Follows, do you want to defend why it's not in your motion?
Hello, yes, Chair. I think the reasons really that it's not in the motion is that because it's not specified how that would actually happen, we can't actually articulate a negative reason in that respect that would actually hold up. I believe that's pretty much what you argued, Beth, when we raised the exact same point that Councillor Gray did. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that just if I could come back on that a second? Is that not an absence from the application, something that we can also comment on? Because that they have got to put forward a proposal to say that this is a practical solution, right? And how are they going to maintain it? Now, Beth on the one hand is saying, well, we can't raise that because we don't know. And I'm saying, well, we're not happy with this application because we don't know. And thank you. I'm not going to go on anymore. You've discussed it. I've made my point. I'll leave it to Councillor Fellows and Councillor Townsend, and I should be delighted when they support the appeal if it comes. Cheers.
Councillor Else. You're on mute, Councillor Else.
No, okay. Just a minor point. Councillor Follows, in his reason for refusal, said use the word substantial, whereas we agreed in breakout that we would use significant.
Apologies, David.
As in the conclusion. Yeah, it got a bit confusing.
Sorry, can I just interject there? I think Beth confirmed that we should use substantial right at the end.
No, she didn't.
That's where I got confused, because I think it was raised a couple of times and I think I've got the wrong one. If Beth can just confirm what the correct word would be, I think we'd be in the right place.
So the sorry, thank you, Chairman. The test for heritage, harm to heritage, is either substantial or less than substantial. So substantial would be the correct terminology, and apologies for the slight error within the conclusion. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, right. So I hope people are clear what the motion is. Do you want to read it again, Councillor Follows, just so we're absolutely sure?
Can I ask officers to read it out so I don't make a mistake on the wording, just to make absolutely sure? I just want to be clear on this one. Sorry, Chair.
I'm not sure officers have written it down. I think you may be the only person with a...
That's fair enough. I'll read out what I've got then. The benefits of providing 5G mobile coverage to the public would not outweigh the adverse impacts in relation to the limited, less than substantial harm to the conservation area. Is that the correct wording, Beth? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the second reason is impact on residential community by virtue of its oppressive form.
Okay, that's the motion. Can we go to the vote, please?
So that's 10 votes in favour of the recommendation to refuse that Councillor Follows has just read out, and 5 votes against, so that is refused.
Well, the motion has been carried, isn't it?
Well, yes.
Motion to refuse has been carried, yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to the next item in that case. So this is land at Woodside Park, Caddershaw Lane. Kate, do you want to give us a briefing, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Kimberly, could you possibly bring up the presentation to the screen? Thank you. So as you can see from the application, has got quite a long description, but effectively it's an application for the approval of reserve matters pursuant to an existing outline consent for the provision of dwellings at Woodside Park. So here you can see, sorry, thank you. Here you can see the site plan. That's the one. Thank you very much. So here's the site plan. As you can see, the site's outlined in red and it's on the southern side of Caddershaw Lane. You can see an area of blue as well indicated on the plan, which is land which is also within the applicant's ownership, but outside of the current proposal. The buildings that you can see there indicated on the site plan have all but one been demolished. And just a note in terms of land levels, that the land levels change significantly through the site, with the southern part of the site adjacent to the wooded area and the lake being at a much higher level than Caddershaw Lane itself. And here you can see a copy of the block plan, starting at the top right hand side of the site. You can see there the white building is the existing ambulance station, which is to be retained. Behind that there is a block of residential accommodation and also the proposed commercial building, which would have a non-residential institution use, which is currently proposed to be a nursery at ground floor level and office accommodation above. As you can see, the development contains a mix of flatted buildings, which are the larger buildings you can see there, and dwelling houses throughout the site. So in terms of the details of the scheme, it's a reserve matters application. So the principle of the development isn't for consideration at this point. It's the reserve matters of layout, scale, landscaping and appearance, i.e. all of the 4 reserve matters. The current proposal is for 97 dwellings having been reduced from the 100 dwellings which were previously proposed. 17 of those would be affordable, and there would be 28 1-bed, 39 2-bed, 27 3-bed and 3 4-bed units within the scheme. As I said, in relation to the site plan, there'd also be a commercial building which would provide a community use, a nursery at the ground floor level and offices above. Whilst there wouldn't be a provision of play space to serve the development on the site, there would be the provision of a locally equipped area of play or elite to the south of the site within the blue line land or the wooded area adjacent to the existing lake, and that was something which we've granted consent for following a recent committee determination. The scheme would also provide 208 parking spaces to serve the 97 dwellings proposed alongside the commercial accommodation and the existing ambulance station. So here you can see some proposed street scenes for the scheme. The top of those street scenes is for the view onto Cattershall Lane, with the 4 buildings you can see in full colour being those that are proposed within the application scheme. The second street scene you can see there is of sort of the main road running through the development from north to south. So you can see the significant change in level. You can also see the block of flats which is proposed onto the corner of the Spine Road, and further blocks of flats as you move up through the site, with the upper part of the site occupied by family dwelling houses. And here is some indicative elevation plans, or rather the detailed elevation plans for the proposed units onto Cattershall Lane, so fronting onto Cattershall. There would be 2 blocks of 3 terraced houses, which, as you can see, would have a 2.5-storey form with dormers to the front windows and a traditional floor plan with the master bedroom within the roof space. And here you can see elevations for Block B, which would be the flats, the block of flats immediately adjacent to those terrace buildings, part of which would be fronting onto Cattershall Lane. The right-hand side image you can see there at the top is of the front elevation as it would be presented to Cattershall Lane, with the coloured elevation being as it would appear from the road within the new development. And finally, here's an indicative elevation for some of the semi-detached dwelling houses which would be created facing towards the lake at the top or the southern end of the site. And here you can see a parking plan. The spaces shown in the pink colour are allocated parking spaces, and the spaces shown in green are unallocated parking spaces. So as you can see, there would be a mix of parking spaces throughout the development. Those in brown to the immediate top corner of the site would be to serve the commercial units, and those with the line drawn through would be a reprovision of the existing ambulance station spaces like for like. And so now we move to some site photos. You can see here the view from within the site looking towards Skiston's Climb, and you can see the significant change in land levels. And now looking in the opposite direction towards the wooded area from within the site, as you can see again to the other side of the site, there's also a significant rise up. And looking now towards the top of the site, you can see the way the top of the site is surrounded by woodland, and again the change in land levels. And looking now from the top of the development site down across it, you can just see in the background there the blue building, which is the retained ambulance station, and to the opposite side of Cattershall Lane, the relatively newly constructed dwellings, which have 2.5 stories. And as members will be aware, there was an application refused at the end of 2019 for reserve matters on the site, which I think is highly pertinent to this decision. So I've just provided some information here to compare the two schemes. The first refusal reason of that scheme was in relation to it having a detrimental impact on the visual amenity due to the scale, mass and bulk of the buildings. And as that was articulated at the meeting, I think the primary concern was in relation to the elevation onto Cattershall Lane and this appearing out of context within the surrounding buildings. In order to address that, you can see here that the applicant has amended the scheme to break up the large block which was previously proposed fronting onto Cattershall Lane, and instead of providing flats throughout the whole of that area, they have proposed to provide 2 terraces of 3 dwellings of 2.5 stories in site, which is the bottom image, which is now what's proposed. As you can see, the ridge height of those dwellings fronting onto the lane has been reduced beyond that of the existing neighbouring properties to the right there on Skiston's Climb. And the second refusal reason was in relation to it being detrimental to adjoining occupiers, and that was predominantly articulated in relation to concern about overlooking. The concerns about overlooking were twofold. One was in relation to a concern about overlooking of the properties to the opposite side of Cattershall Lane, the newly constructed properties. The amended scheme now, with the much smaller terrace dwellings proposed in the previous block of flats, the balconies which were previously proposed have been removed. There are 2 balconies now proposed within the current scheme fronting onto Cattershall Lane, but they wouldn't be directly facing towards the newly constructed dwellings opposite. They'd only be facing towards an existing access to offices on the opposite side of the road. You can also, but the other element of the privacy concern was in relation to overlooking predominantly of the garden of 1 Skiston's Climb. 1 Skiston's Climb is the building which immediately adjoins the site, which you can see on the left-hand side of the image here, outside of the red line. Now, Block C, which is the block to the rear of the dwellings fronting onto Cattershall Lane, has been amended to look to address that, and the next slide shows the floor plans. So if we look, in fact, first at the right-hand side image, which was the scheme which was previously refused, and that western elevation onto Block C, you can see here that there were previously a number of balconies and principal windows to habitable rooms which were proposed onto that elevation, and there was a concern that they would be in too close proximity to the garden of 1 Skiston's Climb. That's now been amended to the floor plan you can see on the left-hand side there. So in effect, the floor layout has been switched, so the windows to the corridor now occupy most of the length of that elevation and are marked as obscure glazed. 1 balcony would remain at the very end southern part of that block, as you can see there on the floor plan, but that would be well beyond the garden level of 1 Skiston's Climb and distance from the other properties on Skiston's Climb. And there was a third and final refusal reason of the previous application, which was in relation to the lack of a legal agreement to secure the provision of the LEAP. the relevant legal agreement has now been completed in association with the revised outline application, which we recently determined. So that issue is now addressed as well. So to clarify, the recommendation is to grant permission subject to conditions and informatives. Following discussions between myself and the development manager and our legal advisor earlier today, we consider now that that recommendation should also be subject to the prior completion of a legal agreement, deed of variation, to secure the changes to the affordable housing which are proposed within this reserve matters application. So that is a verbal update to update the recommendation to also require the prior completion of a legal agreement. And just to update as well, I've provided 2 update sheets in relation to the application. The first contained viability information in relation to the proposal and the affordable housing, and included the applicant's assessment of the viability and the assessment of the viability which was provided to us by the independent reviewer who we asked to look over for the scheme. Both conclude, including the expert opinion that we instructed, both conclude that the scheme is providing the maximum viable level of affordable accommodation that it can. In relation to the second update sheet, this will have reached you earlier today, and I will just talk you through the contents of that. Firstly, it includes 2 copies of the site plan in relation to both the proposed and the previously refused application, and it also includes copies of the street scene onto Tattershall Lane, which was considered to be a central part of the assessment. There is also within there a table providing the detailed breakdown of the floor areas for each of the units and whether they comply with the nationally described space standards. There is also some reference to additional information from the Housing Enabling team in relation to the application, and there is reference to an additional application for the provision of an access which was initially missed off the site history. Finally, at the end of the update sheet, there are proposed amendments to 3 of the recommended conditions. The first of those is in relation to condition 14, which is the condition which requires obscure glazing of the side windows facing towards Skiston's Climb within Block C, which is that block which we just saw the floor plan for in the presentation. Based on feedback from the applicant, I've proposed to amend that condition to allow that last window, which provides a balcony, to be used as such, rather than fixed shut, and that's acceptable in terms of privacy and overlooking, given the separation distances. And finally, I propose just to update the landscaping conditions with some very minor changes to the wording, and making the requirement for the soft landscaping to be submitted prior to commencement rather than prior to occupation as previously. So that just tightens up our control of the matter to ensure that we get a successful landscaping scheme. And that is everything, Chair. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. During your presentation, you mentioned some of the you showed some elevations of the properties, and you did say said they were indicative. I believe this is detailed application, so they're not indicative. I mean, they may be examples, but those are the designs that we built. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, apologies, Chair, that is correct. I'm sorry, I don't know where the indicative popped in, but this is an application for the whole of the reserve matters, so it's not indicative.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. Right, move on to any comments from members. Councillor Cotter.
Yeah, I don't want to comment actually at this stage, maybe later, but just a simple question, something I don't understand. Paragraphs 22 and paragraph 22 effectively in the report talks about the sustainability of the development, and there's a lot of material in there about putting conditions in relating to council's policies on climate change. Now, the only reason I want to ask a question about this, I'm a little confused. I've been to a number of planning meetings in which members of the committee have raised issues about wanting to put conditions into application, into the permissions, which relate to the council's policies on climate change. But I thought the response I had heard was to the effect that although we may have those policies, they have not been translated into our planning policies, and that may well have to wait until local plan 2. But I do see, and I think for me at least, the first time in this particular report, there are 2 specific conditions being proposed which seem to be hung on our climate change policies, although very loosely described as actually relating to our policies on sustainability. And I just can't get the things together. I mean, what greenhouse gas emissions has got to do with the conditions we've put in there about water and so on is a bit beyond me. So I wonder if planning officers could just explain for me whether we've had a shift of view on this, or whether somehow I've misheard all of this. But I'm sure I've heard it a lot of times, and this seems to be a different approach.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Cotter. The sustainability policy referred to, CC2, covers a number of different factors in relation to sustainability. So it's correct in both counts in a sense. So there are some things within there, particularly in relation to renewable technologies and various things which are indicated within the NPPF, which we don't yet have the local policy to support a requirement for. But there are also things which we do actually have the policy to support a requirement for, particularly limiting the water use of developments and ensuring a future connection for superfast broadband. The limits to water use we have been aiming to condition on consents for new dwellings for some time, and the conditions in relation to fastest possible broadband is something which we've started conditioning more recently, so perhaps that would be why the conditions haven't come up on previous applications. But in effect, that's the position, that there are some matters that we do have full control of in terms of conditioning, and we've ensured that that's been the case with this application. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Darcy.
That's a bit of a follow-up to what Councillor Costa's just said. I noticed that in the Design and Access Statement, Part 2, Section 6 is called the Environment and the Future. And on page 64, there's a section 6.3, Sustainability. The first paragraph says, full details of the sustainability measures to be incorporated within the development will be provided at planning condition stage, which I assume is what we're at now. Now, I don't see, other than what Councillor Costa's just mentioned, much in the way of sustainability measures. So my question would be, is that it? And if so, how does that really meet any climate change requirements? To be honest with you, water usage isn't really anything to do with climate change. I mean, it might be, it might help in terms of climate change will cause less water to be available, but it doesn't mitigate or do anything about climate change. So I find that putting that in as a climate change measure, well, I think that's a bit iffy, frankly. And overall, they say in this section 6.3, of which there's only one page, and out of 64 pages, there's one page on sustainability, of which there's about a paragraph. It says that some of the things they suggest they would have, none of them basically amount to anything beyond the minimum legal requirements that they would have to do anyway. So I find that from a major builder such as Crest Nicholson are very, very disappointing. I'm really surprised that they can't come up with something a bit better than that. And it's, I mean, if we can require people to have obscure glazing or no balconies, for goodness sake, why can't we ask them to have solar panels? Also, I think the landscaping proposals are pretty unimaginative. I mean, there's nothing about green roofs, green walls. It's all, you know, and then this, the selection of amenity plants is like the dullest selection you could possibly come up with. Really, Press Nicholson, you've got to do better than this. It's so disappointing. Thank you.
Was there a question in there, Councillor Darcy? You're on mute, Fred.
The question was, is that it in terms of sustainability measures? Is literally what Councillor Costa said, that particular section, is that it? And if so, you know, frankly, it's risible.
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor. So the application before us is a planning application determination stage, which isn't quite the same as condition stage. So the condition stage is when they're seeking to discharge the conditions which we've attached to a consent, should consent be granted. But notwithstanding that, in effect, the sustainability of the scheme is as indicated within the details. We can get further details of the water use. We can require them to provide broadband, which obviously hopefully enables home working, etc., which reduces the need for transportation. But in terms of the sort of more significant interventions, such as renewables or providing substantial green walls, that's not something which we have the current leverage to ensure that a developer provides. If we take a sort of step back from the details of various specific sustainability interventions that could be taking place, I think the key thing in relation to this site and sustainability is that it is a highly sustainable development site. It's at the centre of an existing urban area. It's not within Godalming town centre, but it's a very short walking distance. And there's obviously an extensive range of services and public transport provisions within Godalming. And it represents an appropriate use of a brownfield site, which is obviously a much more sustainable pattern of development than developing in countryside areas. So on that basis, I think the sustainability of this development is high in that it promotes an efficient use of land. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably best to start off with, this obviously has outlined at some point something's going to go here, so it's just a case of trying to push back continuously to make it as good as it can be under the circumstances. I honestly do think it has got better, but to be quite honest, it would be very difficult for it to have got worse over the 3 or 4 times that we've had incarnations of this come back. I completely agree with Councillor Darcy's points on sustainability. I mean, there's a little sort of flirtation with CC1 and CC2 that got my hopes up briefly, but I don't think it's actually amounting to a lot. And it would be great in the future if we could somehow get people to determine these things in advance. I mean, really, almost planning applicants should be trying to sell almost their development to us. And speaking for probably a couple of people here, they would sell these developments to quite a lot of us if they had these things to make them more sustainable actually built in up front and told us what they were, instead of us relying on condition to maybe get something. And I think it is disappointing if a developer such as Crest can't do that in advance with us. It'd be good if they could. Just to look at some of the other issues, though, that I think are reasonable questions at this point. So there is still some overlooking of the garden on One Skisdon's Climb, as far as I can see, and I don't know if that's actually been addressed. I can see that it's better, but I don't think it's been fully addressed. Another point that's been raised over the last week, having looked at myself and also spoken to a few of the residents that live down there, there's quite a lot of water runoff from the site. It doesn't seem to be a burst pipe or anything, just water running off into the road. And at the moment it's doing that despite a quite porous surface, where the fact that the whole site's been levelled. If that's the case in that state, will there be a material issue of water runoff into the road when the whole thing has been developed and paved over? That wasn't something that's come up before, but I know some residents have raised it with Thames Water and haven't had a response yet, but it is something I would just like to throw into the mix. Secondly, car parking. I am a little bit disappointed again that highways don't ever comment on anything sensible, but there will be some parking splay out into Cattershall Lane, which we know at the moment is already a problem, and I don't think really that's been resolved. But I think the very last question I'd have is, and I apologise if I've missed this, are there any conditions here that regulate when the building can take place in terms of time of day and days of the week? Because obviously it's a fairly built up residential area, and development traffic and other things may cause a material impact to the residents that already live there. And I think that should be dealt with by condition if it hasn't been already. So for the moment, yeah, that's all the questions I've got. Thank you.
Okay, there were quite a number of questions there. Are you able to answer any of those?
Yes, certainly. Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Follows. In relation to the overlooking impact to One Skiston's climb, obviously it's something the committee will want to take a view on, but in my opinion, there is no potential for a residual overlooking there. The windows that are proposed along the entire length of that garden elevation serve a corridor and could are secured by condition to be obscure glazed. So, you know, my advice is that there isn't an overlooking issue there. In terms of water runoff from the site, the outline consent, and I'm just looking to get you the actual condition number, but the outline consent requires the submission of a detailed SUD scheme, so Sustainable Urban Drainage Scheme, for the site, and obviously the reserve matters would be bound by that consent. So in effect, the developer will be required to get our sign-off for the site drainage, which will look to minimise discharge into the existing public sewer network and to store whatever rainwater can be stored on site. In relation to the issue of parking overspill, this is, I suppose, to a significant extent tied up in the principle of the scheme and the outline. So the fact that we've granted consent for at an outline stage for up to 100 units means we have in effect accepted the parking level. The applicant has demonstrated through this scheme that it does comply with our standards, and that it does provide visitor spaces. So in that respect, I don't have any concerns. In relation to the building times, I'm just going to check that now to make sure that I did put a limitation to the construction hours on the consent, if there isn't one in the outline, but I will look that up now so I can confirm to you.
Thank you.
In that case, we'll move on to Councillor Townsend, and Kate can come back on that building hours issue. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I too share Councillor Darcy's concerns and frustrations about sustainable construction, and also, you know, the design is a bit disappointing. However, I would say that it is a much better design from the point of view of the street scene on Cattershall Lane than what was proposed before, and the impact on the existing residents there has been lessened, I feel. You know, with the little terrace of houses instead of the block of flats, it would have just been great if they just staggered those houses slightly in some way to make it slightly more interesting, but that seems to be an impossibility. One of the things that you know, does concern me, which I'm glad to see there's condition 10 in there from Thames Water, but yet again we're being highlighted about the lack of water, the lack of capacity within the water infrastructure, and we need to, you know, be always bearing this in mind, and carry on lobbying Thames Water separately outside of planning. But you know, the cumulative impact of all of these houses on our water infrastructure is a very worrying concern. And yet again, a couple of days ago, you know, people saying they had no water in their taps in Newhurst for days and days. Anyway, I digress slightly, but one of my concerns is the amount of tarmac involved in this development. It is a poor design. There's loads of car parking. It's not attractive. The landscaping scheme is poor. But what I would like to ask Kate is whether or not there's any way of getting a permeable surface there. We're concerned about runoff from the site. I know a SUDS will come into it, but on a recent application in Cranley, we managed to get a permeable surface, and I just wondered whether or not there are any chances of getting a permeable surface within these tarmacked areas, seeing as they are so vast. Thank you.
Kate, can you carry on, Kate?
Sorry, yes, yes, condition 9, I believe, that's recommended requires details of all the hard surfaces within the development to be submitted, and it does in there say that we'd be looking for those to be permeable, and even more so within the areas where trees are going to be planted. So that is fully tied up within the schedule of recommended conditions. And to come back, Councillor Follows, in relation to your query regarding construction hours, I can confirm that the outline consent requires the provision of a construction environmental management plan to be submitted prior to the development commencing, and that would include details of construction hours, and it would in effect go beyond a condition which just limits the construction hours, to make sure that the applicant provides a detailed schedule of how they're going to manage the various potential environmental implications of the development. Thank you.
Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Chair. I remember this application when it first came into Waverley several years ago, and I had a meeting actually with Councillor Follows, and I think we were dismayed then how little the developers were doing. And to me, it seems like they've done the bare minimum to get this over the line. And I think that's such a shame. You know, they say they want to engage with the communities, be part of the communities, yet they do the least amount possible. But we are where we are on this one. They've managed to squeeze the permission. I think it was Councillor Townsend said this is better. Yes, it's better, but not that much better, but it is better. But they could have gone even further. So I'm struggling. I really don't like this application, but I'm struggling in planning terms, and that's the issue for me. I'm really grateful for Kate. I think she's done an excellent presentation. I think her reports, as always, really help. So thank you, Kate. That is really helpful. And I suppose my only other point is more about the future. We talk at virtually every meeting about sustainability, and Councillor Darcy normally has a point to make on that, and it's very valid. We must get local plan part 2 through, which we can put some decent policies to actually give us some weight to put behind that. So just really summarising, really disappointed, but I think they've probably just pushed it over the line, which is disappointing, but I think I have to accept that. So thank you, Chair, for allowing me to have my little rant.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things on answering questions from the letters that have been sent in. I'd just like to highlight a few things. It contradicts Godalming hillside policy, and although Godalming is in a valley, and this area is not one of the most, it's more industrial and has been, and is continuing to be so. It is very important to retain lovely views of the hillsides, and that is, as well as the River Mull, those are two of the areas that are very important for the residents. So I want to know if that has been addressed. Perhaps Kate can say that. And the second thing is access to the wooded area. Is that going to be retained, please? Thank you.
Okay, can you comment on those?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Reid. In relation to the Godalming hillside policy, it doesn't say, you know, point blank that we won't permit any development on Godalming's hillsides. It certainly is, as you can see, somewhat of a sloping site. It's my opinion and my assessment of the case that it wouldn't have an adverse impact on the appearance of the hillside, and that sufficient views of it would still remain. That's obviously a matter the committee can also consider, bearing in mind obviously the fact that the principle of the development has been accepted through the grant of the outline consent for up to 100 units. In relation to the access to woodland, yes, that will continue to be tied up by the legal agreement of the outline consent, which binds this reserved matters application as well. So it will continue to be secured as a publicly accessible area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree totally with the fact that it isn't awful. It was awful when we first looked at it. It's now just very poor. But I think in the light of the amount of construction in Cattershall Lane, that the residents would be happy if we actually passed this and they could see some end to the continuous construction traffic that they've had to suffer for the last several years. So I would, on that basis, recommend that we accept it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And I think that is the last speaker. So, Councillor Cossa, jumping in at the end.
I assumed you were going to move to the vote, and I therefore wanted to raise a point of order. Something that's just concerned me for a while, actually, and I'd just like some clarification on. I think you said something at the beginning of the meeting about councillors remaining visible during the debate of an item. Well, there are at least 3 councillors who, during this debate, have either disappeared completely for a period, or have popped up their own pictures rather than actually their own persona. I'm not going to identify who they are, and I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. But I do think it's a dilemma, and I'd like to understand what we are actually doing to monitor that and consider it. Because certainly when we used to sit in the chamber, it was very clear that if somebody left and clearly didn't listen to part of the debate, they were excluded from the vote. I think that's so much more difficult in a remote meeting. And I'd just like to have your ruling and understanding and advice for the committee, really, as to how we might monitor that and what the rules actually are.
Can I suggest it's a very good point, Councillor Cossa, that I'll discuss that with planning officers and with Democratic Services offline, and we'll come back with an improved procedure.
Chairman,
that.
Thank you very much.
It's Fiona Cameron here. Just to reassure Councillor Cossa that the regulations that were passed by the government back in April around remote councillors attending meetings remotely require that councillors are able to hear and be heard. It's video is preferable, but it's accepted in the regulations that may not always be possible. For example, if you have a poor or an unstable internet connection, in order to preserve bandwidth, you might just turn your video off, and that means that you can hear better, and people are able to hear you better. So the requirement is that members can hear and be heard, and I'm afraid, to a certain extent, we have to rely on your integrity, that you are present throughout and are listening to the debate, even if you feel that there's a need to shut off your video for any reason.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much, Fiona.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Fiona. Okay, just before we move to the vote, can we be clear? The recommendation I've got on paper is that, subject to conditions 116 and forms 1 to 5, permission be granted. I think I understand, Kate, that we should also add and completion of a legal agreement. Is that correct?
We now have concluded that we would need to complete a deed of variation to vary the affordable housing which we've secured under the outline to make it align with what's now proposed in the reserved matters.
Okay, so the motion as amended then is subject to conditions 1 to 16, informative 1 to 5, and the legal agreement that Kate just spoke to, that permission be granted. So can we move to the vote, please?
Chairman, that's 12 votes in favour of the recommendation and 3 against and no abstentions.
Okay, so that's been passed. And I don't think there are any matters which require exclusion of press and public. So I think we've come to conclusion. Thank you very much, members. Good evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Good evening.
Good night.